welcome to Progressive Spotlight, the podcast where we highlight some of the best and brightest voices in the progressive movement. My name is John Brougher. I'm your host with NGP Van, and I'm really happy to be joined by Jess McIntosh, Communications Director for Emily's List, and Melissa Ryan, Digital Director. Jess, Melissa, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So, for the folks that have not worked with Emily's List before, can you talk a little bit about Emily's List? Like, what is Emily's List? Give us the intro.
Sure. Emily's List is the nation's largest resource for women in politics. We recruit and train and support pro-choice Democratic women up and down the ballot. We do very down ballot, super local city council races, and hopefully we'll be fielding a presidential candidate in 2016. So it is literally full spectrum. We have staff all over the country. We look for the best women in their communities. Women do really well when they run, but getting them to run is a challenge. So we find them and we tell them that they ought to do this, and we show them how to do it, and we answer those first questions. And then eventually we endorse them and we put the support of our 2 million members behind them, and we send them on their way to victory. And 2012 was a huge year for us, and we're really looking forward to 2014.
That's awesome. So, Jess and Melissa, can you sort of walk us through how you folks got to Emily's List? How did you folks get to DC? What was your story?
Yeah, so I actually came into politics through political blogging. I started out on a local blog in Connecticut called Connecticut Local Politics, where I wrote about municipal and state politics for a couple of years. Like, school board elections was my beat. I got very excited about it. And then one day, a man named Ned Lamont decided to challenge Joe Lieberman for the Democratic Senate nomination. And by virtue of being someone who had written about politics in the state, despite not professionally, I was suddenly vaulted into being considered an expert in all things local politics. So my little blog went from getting 50 hits a day to 50,000 hits in a week. And we were featured on all sorts of national news. And I also got very involved in the campaign as an organizer, and just everything in my activism went to a new level. And when the campaign was over, people were like, you spend so much time on politics, you should probably do it for a living. And as it turns out, doing internet and politics is a thing you can do. I'm the digital director here at Emily's List. So what I do now is actually a lot of that same thing, is like where politics and technology intersect. Finding people in online communities where they are, if they're on Facebook, if they're on Twitter, if they're on the blogs, if they want to be on our email list, and connecting with them so that they know that what Emily's List is about and that we're a resource for them and what they want to do.
I was sort of your quintessential disaffected college kid, and I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. But I'm a New Yorker, and I was in college when 9/11 happened, and it totally, obviously it upended everybody's world, but it made me focus on the news, and I started watching the news obsessively, and that was what I cared about. And then I watched us go into war and became really upset about the way that was happening. I was so out of touch before that. I had been a Nader voter. I didn't even realize how bad things could get. And then I did. So I knew then I wanted to work in politics, but that was all I knew. So I called up the one person I knew in DC and said, I'm graduating with a master's in English, help. And he sent me to a direct mail firm, which it turned out was a perfect first gig, especially for a New York City kid, because you realize very quickly that you don't speak American in the same way. I'm running for the Georgia state legislature and I don't have a clue what to say. So crash course, and I immediately started on campaigns after that, and I never looked back. Started with Emily's List late in 2010, and I'm the communications director here.
So sort of along those same lines, one of the questions that I know I get, and I'm sure you folks get all the time, is sort of, in the same way as your story, Jess, it's sort of, I just graduated from college, or even I'm looking to change my career. Mm-hmm. I want to do politics, but beyond that, folks just don't have a sense. If you're trying to, quote unquote, break into politics, what kind of recommendations do you have for folks? Even if they've maybe been on 0 campaigns before, or 1 at most, you volunteered in 2012. What do you say to those folks?
One thing that I say is whether you're looking in DC or whether you're looking for an election in your home state, one thing I love about politics is the barrier to entry is low. If you work hard and you are not an asshole, you will find a job. I hope cursing is okay on this podcast.
We'll edit this in post. That's fine.
But the other thing I'll say is that I found when I was first looking for a job, what I did was I went down to DC once a month, and pretty much anyone who would have coffee with me, who would answer my email, I would sit down with them. And it's a very nervous thing to ask someone who's busy to like, will you have coffee with me? Will you help me out? But I found that people actually liked being asked because it meant that they were influential. It meant that they had made it. So, I mean, that's actually how I found my first few jobs in politics, was I would just meet with anyone who would sit down
and those people asked other people before.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when they were your age, they were the people making those uncomfortable phone calls. So when you get to the point where you are getting those uncomfortable phone calls,
like, oh,
you're charitable.
Right.
And you totally meet with them. So it's good to remember that, like, the person you are cold calling was once in your shoes.
Totally. And sort of for the folks who are maybe in that same kind of pipeline, but this sort of one thing that we also hear a ton of is sort of people who have maybe done one campaign, but they can't seem to break that barrier. You know, I hear this a lot from field folks, but this applies in any sort of the campaign departments. But, you know, how do I get past the FO? How do I get past, you know, press assistant? Do you have advice for those folks who are sort of sitting in that pipeline and trying to move to their next campaign or to, you know, organization?
I think I have two pieces. One is say yes to everything. Like if you're a press assistant and somebody asks for an advance person to set up a rally, say yes. Make yourself indispensable. Do things that are above and beyond your job description. And on a campaign, those kinds of moments come up regularly. So you'll have those opportunities if you take them. And then I think the other piece is to look at different kinds of campaigns. If you have been a press assistant on a Senate race 3 times, think about a House race. It's a smaller pool. It's a smaller staff. So a press assistant title there might have a lot more responsibility than a press assistant on a Senate race. So even if the title doesn't change, the responsibility portfolio can, and then you can always massage the title and explain that you were, you know, in charge of X, Y, and Z. And pick campaigns or look at campaigns based on what other staff they have. Is there somebody that you're really excited to work with? And if there is, maybe say yes to something that has a lower title than you. The bottom line is titles don't matter. What matters is your responsibility portfolio and who you're working with. So if you are happy with those things, fear not. I was a press secretary for like 7 years. I never changed titles, but it was a totally unique and fulfilling experience every time I worked in a different place. So yeah, I think switch from title and look at what you get to do.
It's amazing to me, like, you know, you'll get that call, like, can you be in California in 3 days? And the answer needs to be yes, when you're young, when you're just starting out. And if you become that person who's flexible, you're going to get that call more. The other thing is, really, when you're starting out, focus on learning everything you can and focus on getting good. Because you don't want to be remembered as, I mean, it's good to be remembered as the good campaign staffer, but as Jess said, like, you really want to be the indispensable one, the good one, like the person who really wanted to get the most from the job. And that person stands out. They really do.
The interns who get hired are the interns you realize you actually can't live without. And so you have to start paying them. There's nothing you can do except put them on staff because they will leave you and you will be desperate. Yeah.
Along the lines of being awesome in that capacity, you know, speaking as someone that does comms as well, although not to the same degree that you folks do, it seems to me like digital and comms both, like there's obviously a lot of pitching you folks have to do, whether you're talking about to bloggers, to reporters, to people who do both, etc. Is there, you don't have to give away your big secrets, but is there a way that you folks approach pitching? Is there sort of like a Jess or Melissa like secret sauce for how you approach it?
I think it's probably pretty different because dealing with bloggers is a much more personal relationship-based thing than dealing with some reporters have that personal relationship with, and some of them you've never spoken to before. So I think you should take this.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk to bloggers, I think a lot about treating them less like press and more like a constituency group, like allies in the fight. So when I'm meeting with bloggers and talking with bloggers, it's a lot like meeting with a local labor leader or a community leader. So it's less of this is the message where, you know, this is what I'm trying to get out, and more, how can we work on this together? A lot of that is reaching out to people before you need something from them, letting them know you're out there, that you're going to be coming to them. A lot of it's letting them know that you're really into their work, that you're reading their blog, that you're following them on Twitter. And I think some of it too is soliciting feedback and let's work together. And, you know, oh, I'm thinking about doing this online action. What do you think? Not, can you post this? But before it's even a thing, you know, what's your feedback on it? And taking that seriously. That's really helpful in getting buy-in and getting them to work with you so that they feel more like partners in what you're doing.
Yeah. You get better output that way too.
Yeah.
reporters, they run the gamut. Like, some of them you can interact with that way. Some of them have a lot more distance. But I think in all cases, thinking about what they want and what would make it a good story for them, and then trying to tailor your pitches. So you're not just saying, here's this neat thing that we did. We're saying, I have noticed that you have covered X, Y, and Z really well. Here's this neat thing that we're doing and how it fits right into the reporting you're already doing. So, and package it as neatly as you possibly can. Give them everything that they possibly want. Never hesitate to do any portion of somebody's job for them. Like, that's terrific if you can put that on your plate.
Well, I think one thing that we sort of on this rapid response kind of topic, it seems like, and just from a passive observer's perspective, but we've had the war on women, but it seems like even now, like maybe post 2012, like every day there's still one more story about like, oh great, new misogyny story, or oh great, there's something new awful happening every like hour.
Sometimes we have to triage. We can't do that because we're all full up with those.
Well, so I'm curious, is there a triage process with so much happening?
We have an internal listserv.
Maybe not the word triage, like good triage, like happy triage.
I mean, it's hard to be happy about it when.
Right.
Well, okay, so here, this is a good example. In Congress, they're trying to pass the restrictions on abortion, the totally unconstitutional, never going to pass the Senate, president's never going to sign it. So it's kind of fun to watch Marco Rubio tie himself in knots over it. Like, I'm okay with that. It's okay. It's a fun thing to message on. I love how tortured they are about it. What is not fun is what's happening in the States, where we are losing real legislative battles and women are having to deal with these things. It is only a fun thing to message on if it's not real, and it is very real for a lot of women in lots of parts of the country. So in that case, you take it as seriously as the issue warrants, and it becomes a lot harder to laugh at these guys. But there is so much, and you would think that they would have learned their lesson after the shellacking of 2012, and they have not.
No.
It turns out. So hopefully we lose the legislative battles, we win the electoral ones, and we don't need to worry about it next time around.
Yeah, and I would say one thing about our process here, without going too much into it, I mean, like, constant communication is important. The fact that we're able to work together and collaborate. What's the press piece on this? What's the online piece? And making sure that we're always working towards the same goal or on the same thing. And that just being able to, like, have someone like Jess, who, like, I work really well with, she works really well with me, but to be in that constant communication is very helpful. So, like, we don't surprise each other.
Right.
Like, I don't see a press piece and be like, wait, where did that from?
Oh, no, that would, I mean, nights and weekends, like, we're always on, they're always talking, so we're always listening. Yeah.
Well, and with so many possible areas to focus on, is there, to the extent that you can talk about it, is there a process for dealing with all of these different stories, or even just all these different areas, let alone if it's not something triage-y, but like all these different candidates even, something like that?
I think, obviously, at Emily's List, our ultimate goal is to put Democratic women in office. So if, say, there are multiple things happening in North Carolina and Texas and in the House,
which there are.
On any given day.
Yeah, we can use multiple channels to hit them, which is great. I might be focusing on Marco Rubio in the press shop, but Melissa is all about the motorcycle safety abortion bill in North Carolina, because that's what online is responding to. But we look for places where we can highlight women's leadership. So Texas was a perfect example, because you have Rick Perry doing what Rick Perry does, and you have Wendy Davis being the face of the pro-choice movement, the women's movement, women in Texas. It's not even all women in Texas, really. So when we get something like that where we can say, this woman is the clearest possible contrast and the obvious solution to these Republican shenanigans, then that's the place where we're probably most comfortable going.
Yeah, I mean, and in digital, you're always looking for heroes and villains.
Yeah.
So who's the villain and who's the hero, and what's the story that you can tell? And what's great about Emily's List is we've got this, long history with lots of heroes.
Yeah.
So.
Absolutely. But I still remember, it kind of took me by surprise, even though I know a lot of that groundwork had been laid in days and weeks before, but sort of to be watching that live stream and realize there were 200,000 people was just really awe-inspiring. It's still hard to really imagine. On those same lines, are you, because we're familiar with the sort of old academic research about how too many times, like, female candidates aren't even asked, and so that's one of the many major barriers to candidacy. What's sort of next for female candidates? How do we get more pro-choice Democratic women in office? Like, what to be reductive? Like, what do we do? What's the next step?
Well, if you're thinking about running for office, you should attend one of our POP trainings. You can find out where they are on the website. That's our political opportunity program for women who are interested in running for office and candidates. It starts with pipelines. You know, it starts with thinking about running for city council. It starts for thinking about state leg and state senate.
Yeah, and it's also thinking about, especially among younger women, it's thinking about yourselves and your friend groups. You know, like, everybody has that friend who they know ought to run for office. The next time you see her, share that with her. You might be the first person to ask, and women need to be asked multiple times before we set really high bars for ourselves, which the upside of that is that we are fantastic when we get in office. Right. But the downside of that is that fewer of us try. So if you can do what you can to support the women in your own personal network, in your your families, your friends, your colleagues, your coworkers, your fellow students, like, it's got to start as early as possible.
And I know it's hard to probably name just a few, but are there, from your folks' perspective, are there names or areas or even regions we should be looking at right now as sort of people engaged in this issue, engaged in politics broadly? Where should we be looking? Who should we be looking at?
I think what's happening in Western states is really interesting. I think Democratic women are doing really well getting elected in the West. They have a strong history of that, and they still are. So I would point people towards Nevada and Arizona, California and Washington. But also I'd point people to attorney general positions. We have a lot of really strong Democratic women who are attorneys general right now. And those are traditionally pipeline positions. They're the ones who run for governor, and the ones who run for president. So I think if you take a look one rung down from where you would normally look to see leadership, that's who's going to be doing it in 10 years. And there's some exciting people.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have some exciting House candidates. We just did a series of On the List, who are women who are running for House that we're watching, that we think are going to do really well and we're excited about. I also put in a plug for the Pennsylvania governor's race. That's one that's just of personal excitement for me. Allyson Schwartz, one of our candidates.
Well, that's sort of a perfect hero-villain setup right there. I mean, Tom Corbett is... There were a bunch of governors who got in 2010 and had no business getting in, but 2010 was such a terrible wave. He was surfing the very front of that, and now his numbers are totally upside down, largely because he does things like tell women if they don't want to look at their forced ultrasound, they can just close their eyes. And Allyson Schwartz has literally spent her entire career fighting for women. Like, she has been on the forefront of every... I mean, she was the DCCC's recruitment of women. She was in charge of that. I mean, so the fact that she is up against this guy is just sort of a beautiful contrast. And and she's running such a fabulous campaign. I'm totally excited about that. That was a good one to plug.
I was in DJ back in during that time, and so 2010 was a lot of villains. Speaking of heroes and villains, it was a lot of villains.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a rough year.
I'm hoping we get a chance to rectify some of that in 2014. Because if you look at, I mean, Rick Scott, Paul LePage, in Maine, there are just a bunch of guys in there who voters had buyer's remorse right away.
Right. It's funny to think about how many... No, funny is not the right word. It is saddening. It is terrifying to think of how many folks where back in the day we were like, don't worry, that's fine. No.
Never.
LePage? No. And now we have that, right?
Yes.
For folks that want to get more involved and say like, oh man, I have just been so engaged. I love Jess, I love Melissa. How do folks get more engaged with Emily's List, with you folks? What is the best way for them to get involved?
Well, I'd say the easiest thing to do is go to emilyslist.org, sign up for our email list, follow us on Twitter, friend us on Facebook. That's a great way to get plugged into what we're doing immediately.
Awesome. Well, folks, I think we're good on time, right? Thank you so much for your time.
For sure.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm John Brougher with NGP Van, and this has been Progressive Spotlight. Please subscribe to us on iTunes and share with all your friends. Thanks.